Hey, welcome back to Unschooled Theology. I'm one of your hosts, Derick, and over there is Evan. Good day to you, sir.
Good day to you, sir. How we
All
doing?
right, we are diving in now.
I
Uh,
love
we
it.
we, we talked when this tree was first introduced. All right, a few days back, the about how this idea of the knowledge of good and evil is really the idea of morality and moral knowledge, right? That's what morality is concerned with: what is good and what is evil. So to that end, it being represented by the fruit of a tree here, I think tells us some interesting things about the nature of reality. And so to discuss this, we are going to be doing a bit of foreshadowing and discussing, some things about when the man and woman eat the fruit, right? We're going to sort of jump ahead a little bit and pull from that.
Mhm.
But I think it's better to discuss those elements here when we talk specifically about the prohibition. Because when we get to the verses where those things occur, I want to focus more specifically on what they reveal about um, how humans commit sin, right? I think
Mhm.
we'll focus on that when we get to it. Here, we're just going to sort of pull in a little bit from that in order to tell us a little bit more about this tree. So,
Mhm.
um, the consumption of the fruit of this tree is synonymous, I think, with the idea of moral awakening, right?
Mhm.
That's clearly it's about morality. Consume the tree, and that there's a moral awakening, right? Um, but it's interesting to note that, and I find this curious, that merely the prohibition of consumption of the fruit is not like directly related to morality. Just that knowledge doesn't mean that the man and the woman have some sort of grasp of morality, right? They know, oh, I'm not supposed to eat that, but that doesn't, it's not a moral knowledge knowing that they're not supposed to eat that. And I find that interesting, right? So if you think about this, it's just as a dog can be told not to behave a certain way, like
But
not
it
going
doesn't
on the
know
couch,
why.
or what was that?
But it doesn't know why. Is that?
Right. Or not going after food in their bowl until they're told, right? Merely understanding what they aren't supposed to do, that doesn't equate to any kind of moral awakening. And I think it's not actually so much about why, it's that they simply know that the consequences of doing that aren't something that they want, but they don't understand, and they associate, the consequences of doing the right way, things the right way, with something positive like treats, but they don't understand the consequences of their action,
Mhm.
right? They don't understand what happens when they go on the leather couch and rip a hole in it with their claws, right? Or the what happens when they um you know steal the food early, right? With that actually is creating within them a negative thing where they start to protect the food and defend the food and growl and get upset, and you're training that sort of thing out of them. So they don't really understand the consequences of the deeper consequences of the immoral action. And so a true knowledge of morality is something deeper than that, something that comes from the actual eating of the fruit here, right? And
Mhm.
this is, of course, I think, something that is distinctly humans. But we can also see in that a little bit the idea of maturity, right? How kids learn, oh, well, I'm not supposed to do this and I'm not supposed to do that. And at first they learn that, well, if I do this, I'm not going to like whatever consequences are imposed upon me by my parents or whatever because of that. But they don't really, for a long time, really understand, oh, no, I shouldn't do that, because when I do that, there is this like litany of I mean, to put it in sort of these, but it breaks the world, if you will. It breaks God's order. It's wrong because it does things that aren't being forced upon me by parents, that aren't, some sort of like consequence or anything,
Yeah.
but something actually gets like broken because of doing this thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. 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 Like as a kid, I guess don't just whine all the time. And it's
Yeah.
like, or don't complain all the time about everything. It's like, well, or share your toys. It's like Well, you can do that because the parent told you to, but the reason that is because then when you go play with other kids, you're going to be able to actually play with them, and they will want to play with you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you'll get this reciprocal,
Right.
decent relationship, as opposed to if you are the things that your parents have prohibited. If you behave like that, then no one will want to play with you, and you'll end up in a not great situation as a kid. And that's so long term that it's almost, there's a lack of foresight. They can't see that far ahead.
Right.
Because I guess almost a that's a judgment, is kind of the ability to do that, to foresee how a farther way down than maybe other people can. I guess that's good judgment, is the ability to foresee the consequences of actions at a pretty decent distance.
Yes. Yeah.
That's
okay. So the next thing I want to look at that is particularly interesting here is there's sort of an array of things that are immediately associated with consumption of the fruit, right? Or with moral understanding. And I think the phrase specifically in that day is meant to express a sense of immediacy, right? It's not about a 24-hour period. It's about these things happen quickly, they happen right away. In other words, we aren't to sort of like understand that, first we have an immoral awakening, and we sit there with that immoral awakening for a while. And then after a while, we discover more things are revealed to us, and eventually we figure out that the consequence of moral failure is death. But instead, that revelation of everything is rather immediate, right? For instance, right, we see here that the man and woman's moral awakening is immediately followed by a recognition of their nakedness, right? And that nakedness we might take to be their moral inadequacy, right? That's what they see right away, is their inadequacy. And that's immediately followed by a sense of shame, as they recognize that this inadequacy is worthy of judgment and means that they will fail at stewardship, and that the consequence of that is death, right? That's why there is sort of this immediate shame, and then we get to death. In that day you surely will die. And so if we consider this in the light of humanity's relationship with morality, right? What we see here is the idea that we understand that to understand our morality, to get that, is to immediately be humbled, right, at the recognition of one's moral inadequacy, and likewise to recognize the sort of the harm that inadequacy causes and the damage that inadequacy does, and to feel shame as a result of that. That's sort of the process. And I think the immediate nature of that, I think it's represented very well in the idea of the consumption of a fruit, because just as you taste a fruit the moment you bite into it, likewise you understand sort of the bitter taste of sin the moment you're awakened to it, the moment you have that sort of moral realization of things.
Interesting. It's kind of like we talked about this related to kids again, and it helps to talk about with kids. It's like when an older kid, especially, because adults don't typically say this, but an older kid is like mature enough but not mature enough to be able to look at a kid who's 3 years younger than him and say, well, you're just a kid. And that's a great way of shaming a kid, of coming to this realization of, oh, I'm not old enough yet. Oh, I'm not there yet. That's a really good, I feel like that's a good picture of like that is a shameful experience when you're 7 and there's a kid who's 10 telling you, oh, well, you're just a kid, I'm not a kid.
The inadequacy,
exactly. And they're and he's, before that a child can be going along minding his own business or her own business, all fine, and then all of a sudden someone says that to you and you're like the wind is completely removed from the sails, and maybe not permanently, but I think that could capture that feeling of that recognition of, oh, I'm not, it's a waking up experience to recognizing this.
For sure.
Are we saying that the complexity of morality is what wakes them up to that? Is that they have an understanding of morality and they realize that they're incapable of fully wrestling with it? Is that what
I don't really see it so much as the complexity that's really waking them up to that, so much as this kind of the effects. And maybe that's what you mean by the complexity, but the idea that no, my actions are wrong because they're wrong, right? Like you realize that no, there is this right and wrong, and they're wrong for their own sake, not because of some sort of consequence my parents have created, or something else that's been sort of created by another individual. No, they're wrong even if someone wasn't going to hold me accountable specifically for it. They're wrong because they, again, break creation, right? They do something and have a real effect just on their own on their own right and their own merit, and that effect is negative.
Excellent. Then the waking up to their inadequacy, is that an inadequacy in the ability to implement things perfectly?
Yeah, the inadequacy to avoid these kind of mistakes, right? As soon as you realize that these kind of things exist, these kind of errors, these wrongs, right? The wrongs that we might do, it's the realization that, oh, these wrongs have an effect, and then realizing, well, no, I'm not good enough to ever not make those kind of mistakes.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Makes sense. Yeah. All right, so the one final thing to mention here, it's about sort of human relationship with sin that is captured in this eating of the fruit. And I think that demonstrates sort of the experiential nature of sin, right? Sin is about the action here, not the knowledge that the fruit gives, right? But to act sinfully is to know it. They're one and the same thing. So it's not, the idea here, I think, is not that the fruit contains within it some special knowledge of something that is suddenly, beamed into the brain of whoever consumes this fruit. I think it's merely the act of partaking of it, right, in direct violation of this prohibition, and making sort of that choice to do it that way, and sort of coming around as the woman does, and sort of realizing, no, I'm going to do this because of these things, even though God has told me not to. I'm going to do it for these reasons, right?
So the knowledge of good and evil, the tree is just an ordinary tree.
Yeah.
So it's not really a tree. It could have, I guess, conceivably, it could have been any tree. And I know we're playing with alternate histories again, but it could have, as long as it was the prohibited tree, that's more significant than it being some sort of mystically endowed tree that provides some sort of knowledge by the fruit.
Yeah, we're not told that it does that. We're just told that this was the title of this tree.
Yeah, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Yeah.
We don't know anything else about it other than that. This is the title of that tree.
Yeah. Interesting.
So
it makes me wonder. It makes me wonder about the title of any of the other trees too. I mean, this is it's a very interesting name to choose for that one. That's an apple tree. That's a peach tree.
By the way, the title of trees. That's a great album title there.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah, the title of trees.
Yeah. No, it's, well, I mean, I look at this as though it is the act of partaking, right, of the fruit, which is forbidden, and it's that act that gives the knowledge of sin and righteousness, if you will, right, good and evil.
I mean, if I think people describe a lot of times, if we're talking about this in maturity, the recognition of right and wrong, a lot of times people will describe they recognize right and wrong the first time they do something wrong. They'll be like, I nabbed a cookie from the cookie jar, and I know I was told not to. And right in that moment, I felt guilt. I felt guilt for the first time, and I understood what it felt like.
I think in secret is the key. Like they may have done things before, but sort of just been that thing little kids do. I got 2 little kids. You might even hear them in the background right now. They test boundaries and do those kinds of things, but eventually they get to the point where they know they're not supposed to do this thing. They know there's something really wrong about it, and they do it kind of in secret, kind of hiding it, but then realize I think that the real recognition that you've done something quote unquote wrong is when you get away with it and still feel that sense of shame. Right.
Which conceivably they do here.
Well, right,
I mean,
because
they admit to God what happened. God allows them to look like they've gotten away with it.
And if the idea is on that day you surely shall die, if you place yourself in the position of the man or the woman here, that sounds to me like a poison fruit, like bite the fruit, you die, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so if you bite the fruit and don't immediately die, you get away with it.
Yeah.
Or you
think you do. That's true.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that might be what, we're sort of meant to see in that.
Yeah.
Is that you're not dying immediately and therefore you've gotten away with it, but really there was something more significant being talked about in terms of the negative consequence.
Yeah. I think that's a powerful thought. I think the idea that it is the act of doing it that imparts the knowledge. Maybe that's been said before. It probably has, but I've not heard that before. And that's very powerful to me.
It reflects most of our experience though with sin, right?
Well, it does. It lines up as soon as you said that. It makes me think that, oh yeah, that does line up. That does tend to be the way experientially we deal with sin. If we're looking at this as the universal experience of humanity, this is a universal story. That applies far more than us all at some point in our lives bumping into some sort of mystical thing that imparts the knowledge of good and evil.
Right. Or that mystical thing was here and now it's genetically passed down somehow. Right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Sort of sinful thing. I don't see that in it. But yeah, so there's it's in the act of committing the sin, I think, that knowledge of it and sort of the full understanding of the consequences that we mentioned before become sort of known, right? Because you feel that shame when you get away with something or think you got away with something, yet still realize that there was something wrong about it, right? Because prior to that point, it's just because, well, you'll get in trouble with your parents or someone, or this thing might happen because I do that. But then it's like, no, I in theory I got away with this, but something still wasn't right here.
This would be a very interesting one for listeners, because I'm curious if people out there have any stories that they can send to us or comment or share somehow of
unschooltheology@protonmail.com.
Do you remember anything of this feeling? Like the first time that you did something wrong and you knew that it was wrong. Yeah. And feeling what that felt like. And does this story seem to line up for you?
But I can remember this feeling.
Yeah.
I can remember sort of feeling that for the first time, but I think I don't know if I can pin it to the exact thing that I did or whatever, but I do know when that sense of guilt and shame and all of that, I remember experiencing it in that way, I guess.
Maybe it's an exercise worth trying. Is trying to remember that, because I don't think I do, but maybe I need to go into a 30-minute meditation and see if I can enter the depths to remember what that experience was.
Could be,
because I've certainly heard other people describe it that, and I'd be curious if anyone else relates to that.
For sure. All right, so and just to piggyback on that too, I mean, that is certainly, we've told fictional stories with that being the way
in which it operates.
It's revealed to people, too. So that speaks, I think, to there being something, if not universal, at least very common about that kind of experience, All right. So with that, I think we're going to wrap up the ideas of the tree and this prohibition. And when we next get to the tree, our emphasis is going to be, again, not on the prohibition, but more on the other players in this story. And since we already have a grasp from these few episodes what the tree here is meant to represent, I think that'll be valuable in terms of helping us understand the context of these other individuals within the story. So on the final episode of these verses, and yes, we've got one more
Our 5-part series.
Yeah, 5-part series on these 2 verses. We're going to do something that we don't do a lot, which is sort of like respond to or address very specifically another idea that's out there, right? Not really as a whole episode. We haven't really done that. We've sort of sprinkled some responses to ideas here or there in other places. We handled a few ideas. Apologies for that.
There's the kids.
Yeah, there's the kids. Who knows what is going on there? But yeah, we in the first episode on these verses, we handled a few different and there's the dogs, a few different possible interpretations that we sort of took issue with. This next time though, we're actually going to devote a whole episode to a particular idea that is out there regularly shared, and that is the idea of whether or not this verse and verses constitute some sort of covenant between God and man. And that may seem rather pedantic and boring, and I forgive you for thinking so, because it certainly has that appearance. But I promise it won't be, right? Because I think the implications of the answer to that question are actually really important to understanding sort of the true destructiveness of sin and what is really lost as a result of sin. And the reason I think that's important is because the better we understand sin and its effects, then the better we understand and are appreciative of the redemption of Christ, right? And so that alone really, I mean, anytime we can better understand the redemption of Christ, for me, that is something that, okay, that's worthwhile then. So hopefully next episode, that's where we're going to get to is by looking at this question of a quote unquote covenant, and taking that all the way to understanding the redemption of Christ. But probably not what you've heard in church if you've heard this subject discussed. So, all right, with that, I'm going to go take care of screaming kids and barking dogs. And in the meantime, feel free to like, subscribe, follow, comment, with your revelation of sin story, or hit us up unschooled theology at protonmail.com, and we will see you then.